He'll show us. Oh,
All right,
I know,
we're
it's
gonna
not
call
like
this meeting
private.
to order.
Right, but we don't have to wait 2 weeks to find out.
6 o'clock.
Oh, he can show us Thursday instead of 2
Let
more
me
weeks
know.
from now.
All
Let
board
me know
members
what
are
you're-
present, with the exception of Michelle Lewis, who's excused for this meeting.
But if you
First thing up is the review and approval of the June 18th, 2024 public meeting minutes. Any edits? Only thing, line 208 says a guy, just because I know her, BES. Okay, here.
208, Joe?
208, yes.
Do you say BE?
BES.
Okay, BESE.
The rest was right, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Make a motion to approve the June 18th public meeting minutes as amended.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor of the motion as presented?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Abstentions? All right. The date and location of the next meeting is July 23rd, 2024 at Belmont Middle School. Next up is public communication. This is an opportunity for members of the public to address the board, and we'll take all comments under advisement. If you wish to comment, please state your name, the town you reside in, and spell your last name. Please try to keep your comments to 2 to 3 minutes, and we have 30 minutes allotted for this time. We will have public comment at the end of the meeting as well.
Over and over and over again.
Amanda LeBlanc, Belmont. I haven't been here, but I've been watching the live streams. So I join you tonight as a parent of a junior and a teacher at BMS for the past 18 years. And I would like to share my thoughts about the grading system and potential changes the board might make. There are 3 changes that will be put into place for the new school year. And I worry that some members of the board, as well as some of the public at large, may be underestimating how effective these changes will be as far as addressing the concerns that have been brought forth. The first change is ALMA. This new reporting system will be a huge game changer in terms of clearing up confusion for parents. They'll have access to so much more information about their students' learning. I wish I could show you a demonstration tonight so you could see the great things it can and will do. Where Empower fell short, ALMA does not. It would be my pleasure to answer any questions about ALMA and how it will help parents understand how their child earned a grade. The second change is the weighing for courses like AP and Honors. I have a child who is a high achiever, and I'm excited for this change that I know will make a difference to many students like her. These students deserve further recognition for their achievement, and now their grade point average will do just that. The third change is the edited language for reassessment that I understand will be coming to the board's way on the 23rd. Reassessment is an important part of my teaching, but I am happy to see that students should not be allowed to reassess. I'm happy to see that there will be more restrictions in place. It has been suggested that students should not be allowed to reassess because that's not how the real world works. I beg to differ. Do you know anyone who failed their driver's ed test? Were they allowed to try again? Students can retake their SATs if they want to. I teach every 6th grader, and some of them are struggling learners. To say, oh well, you didn't understand density the first time, you're out of luck, but that's life, is pretty harsh. We have a responsibility to hold students accountable, but withholding learning isn't the way to do it. These 3 changes have been vetted and discussed at many levels. I would ask the board to give these changes a chance to take place and see the positive outcomes before attempting further systemic changes. If the board is considering changing anything else, and if nothing else I said stays with you, I hope this next fact does. Due to elections, there are only 2 professional development days before the school year. Some of that time is for ALMA training. Each building has new student orientation on the 2nd day, and not to mention the task of getting our classrooms ready. Any other changes you might propose, please consult our building administrators to see if these changes can even realistically be put into place. In closing, I feel staffing shortages should be the #1 priority moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right, seeing no further public comment, we're moving on to new business. And in your packets, we had our board member reports. And the first one, I believe, was from BES.
You mean principal reports?
Principal report, sorry. Board member, I skipped right over him. Anything?
No, not so.
All right, now on to principal reports. All right, so now we're up to PES, so Mr. Hill.
How's everybody doing? My report is fairly short, but I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
What's the, so it appears as though kindergarten is going to be fairly large. What's the size of the rest of the classes running up through 4th grade?
It's been varying between low 50s up to 80. The 4th grade class we just graduated was big, 79 I think. And the smallest class right now is moving into 3rd grade. I think it's 52.
I have a question, Mr. Hill.
Yeah.
So you cited that attendance is an issue and you had 58 students with 10 or more absences. Is there a trend among the reasons why? Like I know when I have to call my child out, I have to give a reason. If he's sick, if you're out of town, etc. But is there any like common themes there?
It was a little bit higher this year. I mean, typically we're around 30 or 35, so it was up this year. But I think, there's more families taking trips for sure, which adds to absences. Other than that, I mean, I don't know if there's anything major.
Is there, like I don't want to use the truancy word for elementary because it just seems wrong. But what happens, like if you get so many absences, like do you get a phone call or is it just that kind of is what it is? Is there letters that go home to?
Yeah, I talked about this a little bit last year, but I've been trying to call home and talk to kids, which is what I found most success with is getting excited about seeing kids in the building. But there is a process in place for sending letters and truancy process, so we're going to try to get back to that as well next year. I don't know that that's extremely effective at the elementary.
I agree, and like, and I'm thinking about this, and I know I've heard at some there might be like consequences, which I don't think is effective at all for elementary students because I would guess it's not their fault. But I'm just curious as to what happens with parents and if it's trips and vacations and I don't know. These kids have opportunities to do presentations on educational things they learned while abroad or whatever.
We do have, occasionally we have kids that do that. It's particularly, we have students that take vacations overseas because their families are from another country, so they typically come back and do presentations on on different things about their country that they're learning or want to share with the class. Sometimes the teachers help guide them in terms of, the standards that they're looking for. I don't talk to the kids that way, but they offer opportunities of things they might be able to talk about. But I mean, I think there are families just having trouble themselves, right? Getting by day to day. So then I think some of that leads to them not getting their kids to school. Maybe anxiety too is up, I would say. I think a lot of our pre-K kids that are coming through now, that were pre-K during COVID, didn't get a lot of time to interact with other kids. So I think the level of anxiety is up. So that can be a contributing factor as well.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Hope you're all doing well. I'll take any questions you may have.
Is that the 28% for students served for with reading interventions, that's staying fairly stable?
So that's students at Tier 2, not our identified students.
Yep.
And I would say, yes, it's stable over last year at least.
Yep. Okay. Yeah, I was asking that, just kind of curious how that played in with, 10% of students were able to exit. So obviously, as some of them are exiting, they're consistently replaced.
Or students are staying in Tier 2.
Okay.
As we've learned more about the science of reading and the need to really fully develop foundational skills before releasing a student from intervention support, we've been erring on the side of caution this year and keeping a student in intervention a little bit longer than we might have in the past to make sure they're really set before releasing them. So that's also part of that philosophy.
Yeah. And would that be the high percentage of students receiving the 6-week intervention cycle? Was that
6
the
weeks
students that are
is
involved
typical.
longer?
6 weeks is typical for a cycle. But what really attributes more to that is the number of cycles that they're seeing.
Okay.
Anything else for CES? All right, moving on to BMS, Mr. Pope.
Hi, everybody. Just a couple of quick highlights, as you can see in the report. I think we had a very successful promotion up on the field. We dodged any rain again, which is always nice to be up on the field. So that just makes for just a much nicer event where we got to celebrate our 8th graders going up to high school. Highlighting, we had a very successful BMS community night this year. This is our 2nd year doing it. First year was okay, but this year it really ramped up with, we added a bunch of things, a lot of families. Our PTO did an outstanding job just putting that together, and we had a really great turnout. We included high school students, elementary school students, and some of the activities that we did as well too. And we added a 3v3 basketball tournament for those of you who didn't come, which was a lot of fun, very successful. We did some really nice transition activities with our students coming into the middle school this year with the open house, and we visited the schools, and we had kids coming up to the middle school to do some tours and things like that, so that was great. We have a lot of kids here over the summer in our summer programs, our summer school, Summer Learning Academy, our ESY program, so we're pretty busy and pretty packed over the summer here. Hopefully things are out of your way, because this is where we do some of our summer school here tonight. The last edition of Bulldog Barks is there, which is always fun. We did some neat financial literacy where we work with the local credit unions in the area where they come into school and work with our 7th and 8th graders, which is just an outstanding opportunity for our kids to experience what it's like when they get a real job and have to spend some money and have a budget and things like that. So that's a lot of fun. And I would say one of my favorite activities that we did kind of as a school staff, I would say, is right after testing, there's always a little bit of a dip, as you try to push through to the end of the school year. We did a little undercover staff dress up a couple days. You can see some pictures in here, which I didn't really tell anybody about. And I was thinking that people were going to think I was crazy to do it and no one was going to participate. But I think the complete opposite was that. And it was really great to see we can tell the kids that the staff was going to dress up, and each day we did something a little different. And it created a lot of kind of conversations between staff and students, which were a lot of fun. So it just kind of helped build some of that community relationships with our students and staff as we kind of finished off the school year. So there's some neat pictures there that we took to celebrate that. And it actually ended up where I think a group of our kids wanted to did their own on the last day. They kind of figured it out by the end. So I think the group of 8th graders did their own, like dress up like a teacher day, type of thing to kind of mess with the teachers. So that was kind of fun. And I closed with, my concern about staffing, specifically, when I wrote this, specifically around our support staff. At the time that I wrote this, we had, I think it was around 17 openings, which is very unusual for us. I've never seen it that high in the 18 years that I've been here. Specifically, I think it was more like 14 support staff positions, one-to-ones, shared support staff, which is really challenging. We've been fortunate enough to work with a outside agency, which is helping us out, but that's not really the long-term solution, in my opinion, about that. Either the quality isn't quite there, or people are just looking other places to make a couple more dollars an hour. So we're struggling finding support for our students with IEPs, either one-to-ones or two-on-ones, or specifically shared staff as well too. So, and then we also have a couple of teaching openings since I wrote this report as well. So that's concerning, but working on it.
Question on the SATs. So generally,
SATs? That'd be high school.
I jumped to BHS. I'm sorry.
Perfect.
Any questions for Mr. Page?
Yeah, thank you for including all the pictures.
We can had trouble downloading the file, but it's great to have the pictures.
I did notice it was a big. I did too. I had trouble downloading it as
I
well.
was looking at the file size, like, wow, that's pretty big.
All right, moving on to the high school. Mr. Finch.
Good evening. This report, my theme or my goal was to really show how active this year was for a lot of our students. We have, right around the neighborhood of 340 to 350 students, on average. And I think one of the strengths of the high school is how diverse our offerings are, despite the fact that we're as small as we are. And we find ways to offer routes to kids, and activities for kids and sports for kids and all of that. So I tried to highlight that. It's obviously a very diverse and long-winded board report. But yeah, I'm happy to answer any specific questions that you have, including about the SATs.
Thank you. So I was just kind of curious
Sure.
in trying to wrap my brain around some of these. So at the high school, you had 73 testers.
Yep.
I'm assuming that's spread between junior class, senior class?
Junior.
Only
So
junior.
it's the junior assessment. So seniors can take the test, but they don't count in the
Towards this, okay.
Yeah.
So that was almost 100% of them that took it then?
It was a pretty good number. We had some opt-outs, but every year, every state assessment, you're going to have some opt-out kids.
Right.
But yeah, that also doesn't count any kids who took it a second time. It's just when we offered it as our state assessment, that was the outcome.
Okay.
So you may have kids either later in their junior year or, as you alluded to, senior year who took it again, and their score, almost every time a kid takes the SAT a second time, it increases at least a bit.
Yeah.
But that is not included here. That is just their state assessment run.
Okay.
First of all, thank you to the principals for pretty high level, like year in review summaries. Those are pretty nice. Specific to the high school, the digital distraction policy tracking.
Yep.
The numbers show a downward trend, which is good. I was curious if that's a realistic trend, or is it maybe teachers don't have as strong a policy as they had in the past, and maybe letting students off a little bit easier, you know what I mean? Like, has there been any changes in how it's been implemented over this time frame?
I would say that the longer it's gone, which is kind of generally what you'd expect, it became a little bit more lax. However, when this was implemented 2 years ago, you would walk down the halls and 90% of the kids had a phone on their desk. It would be going off, it would be getting notifications. It was so distracting all the time. Even if it is from where it was to where it is now, it is a significant improvement and a significant change. The battle that I think we're still kind of internally fighting, how much of that do we really want to fight, is the wireless headphones. Because the policy actually states that a kid can only use wired headphones, so a teacher can see that it's connected to their Chromebook, because they could listen, if a teacher's okay with a kid listening to music while they're doing work, they should be using the Chromebook. They don't always do that. That is probably the most inconsistently enforced aspect of the policy. The phones out is more consistent than the headphones.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Thank you. All right, we're moving on to our year-end discipline reports. First up is BES.
All right. First, I want to take an opportunity to introduce Kelly Antonarella, who's our new associate principal. So she started July 1st. Happy to have her on. So Janelle prepared our discipline report. I'm sure you've had a chance to read it. The numbers look good overall. Our discipline was down. The disciplinary referrals were down significantly for the year. A few things, I think we increased our focus on relationships and processing time with students, particularly some of our students who are in Tier 2 and Tier 3, to provide more support for them. The ABLE program in general, the referrals were down significantly, and I think that's just the way they run the program. It is a therapeutic approach with kids, so I think that has helped considerably in our results with those kids over the years. Just continue to get better each year. The students are still using the ABLE supports and the ABLE room, but there's a lot more proactive support put in place, a lot more teaching of when it's appropriate to use particular tools or strategies, and the students are self-advocating more than ever before for what they need. So that's been very positive. We've increased the consult meetings, which is bringing in the behavioral one-to-ones for discussions about how the students are doing, what's working, what's not working, what they need for support, what questions they have. And there's also monthly PLCs, with just general training for those behavioral one-to-one assistants. We also re-implemented the behavior matrix, where it basically outlines for specific infractions what the consequences are, and I think that really helps with our Tier 2 students when there's very clear expectations and results. Like, if you do this, here's what's going to happen. So I think that's a deterrent at Tier 2 particularly. There were 2 classes last year that had a significant number of referrals. One was kindergarten, and they went from like 470 to 270 this year in first grade, that cohort of students that graded. And then the 4th grade that we graduated to Belmont Middle School was a significant number as well. So,
2 questions. One, do you know off the top of your head if there's any correlation between attendance or low attendance and behavior problems? Like, for example, are students that miss school more often typically the most disruptive, or is there no correlation?
I think that's certainly true for some students. I don't know if it's for all students. So there is some for specific students. I do think that, and we've seen this, now it's trending from middle school, the kids that really missed out in their early years on reading instruction and kind of those fundamental skills, they're struggling more in their older grades, and that leads to behavior and frustration. So I think that we've seen that certainly as well.
Other question. We hope to free our counselors to provide better Tier 2 intervention. What does free the counselors mean?
Yeah, so what we've talked about doing is taking them out of our specials rotation so that they aren't locked into specific times, so that they can create a schedule that works for them and allows them to be free when their students are free. So each counselor has specific grade levels that they're responsible for. So we'll just give them more flexibility. They'll still teach in classes and do what they do, but they're going to have flexibility to develop their own schedule with the different grade levels.
Will they still be doing the curriculum, or are they just not going to be locked into that rotation?
They're just not locked into the rotation. They'll still do the curriculum. The curriculum is actually designed to be reinforced daily. So it's another benefit, I guess, of this model is the teachers will be in the classrooms while they're teaching the curriculum, and then can reinforce the language and the concepts when the counselor's not there.
Any other questions? Mine was more just a and ask for next year. In the middle school and the high school, they both provide, like, it broken down by grade level, what percentage of the referrals were coming from. If it were possible to see that, because like I looked at middle school this year and saw theirs go up, but then I looked at last year's in the elementary school where it was higher in 4th grade. So it's sometimes a little misleading to know, like, did middle school really go way up, or is it because that class just moved along? So if elementary school was able to provide a breakdown of referrals by grade level, that would be helpful.
Noted for next week.
Yeah.
I didn't think about that when I saw it.
Yeah, that was just, it was one, was it what was in place, or was it
Yeah.
that grade moved along?
Oddly enough, I had heard that request before this meeting, so I do have the numbers if you want to see them.
How can you do that? There's not one.
And then Canterbury.
Hi again. So I'm going to echo a lot of what Ben shared, but this year our school-wide theme was Lead with Kindness. So we did a lot of activities and teaching around that theme to reinforce basic kindness and manners, as also interweaving the Second Step program and those types of activities for all students. And then, as Ben described, our Tier 2 students have access to counseling with our school counselor, whether that's one-to-one or in small groups, a lot of social groups and lunch groups, things like that, depending on what the students' needs are. At Tier 3 this year, students who needed therapeutic counseling, that was happening through our social worker. I'm really pleased to say that our overall referrals have declined from last year to this year by 125 school-wide. And I do have the referrals by grade, but I did also note that our grade level class sizes are extremely variable, so it makes looking at this data and comparing this data a little tricky. For example, our smallest class had 9 students. Our largest had 22 students. So it can make things look a little skewed. Our biggest success was, if you look at kindergarten from last year to this year as first graders, their discipline levels and discipline reports decreased by quite a bit. And we're able to work with those students on their friendship skills, social problem solving, all those types of skills that help them be successful in class and on the playground. Any questions?
I have a question. So it talks in here about the OT room being used to help students access tools to self-regulate. So and maybe OT has changed, but like my experience with it would be like if you had students that struggled with writing, they would be working on like hand-eye coordination, things like that. So how does that role play into behavioral issues, and what happens if the OT room is in use by a student who's in there going through?
So this would actually be students who receive OT services. They're often the ones who do get dysregulated and struggle behaviorally, so they do those activities with the OT herself, and it's incorporated into their programming.
I do, but I don't want to ask it.
Just ask me.
So this includes students with like IEPs for behaviorals, et cetera. It's all looped in together?
If they have OT services as part of their plan.
Any other questions for Mrs. Chuck? All right, moving on to middle school.
Hi everyone, happy to be here. Glad I'm wearing a long sleeve shirt. Well, I wish I could echo the same sentiments as the 2 elementary schools. I probably need to hang out with them a little bit more. I think some of the data, as Aaron alluded to, it can be misleading, you know. This is what we pull from the system, so when you see a 47% increase in reports, I can say that we have a lot of reports from one of our programs with kids with pretty significant special needs. I mean, some kids are 3 to 4 reports daily. So that really can skew the data, you know. So you have my report. The top 3 that we really were challenged with is 5th grade. Thanks, Mr. Hill.
Wait a minute, this is upsetting some kids
Yes.
too?
The best kids ever.
Everybody had stuff to do this year at the middle school, right? Yeah, so anyway, just the biggest increases really were the defiance and then subordination. Physical aggression was really, really interesting. 19% of the data with 172 incidents. Again, we have students with special needs who struggle in this area, and their communication skills or their abilities aren't where they need to be to communicate effectively, and sometimes that results in communicating physically. So, and abusive language, again, a little bit shocking. 39 incidents last year, and basically doubled that this year. So, very active. We employ all the same resources. We have a really solid ABLE program, our life skills program, and our counselors are maxed. They are teaching, they are promoting all the themes that you've already heard about, social skills, and, with an eye on some of those trauma-based cases that we have. So they're busy. We could all use, I think, more people, so I'm happy to answer any questions that I can.
So by the sounds of it, a majority of these increases, some of them in excess of 100%, are coming from a fairly small number of students?
Yes, yeah.
So
We have
that-
some pretty significant kids
Right.
with regard to, regulating their behavior. And pretty active reporting, so that helps us when we need it, when we do consults. We bring that data to the team, and when we have the outside people coming in, we can bring the reports and say, this is the pattern, this is what we're looking at. We bring the data to teens, grade levels, and we can start to dig in to find out what we can do to help those kids.
So with those numbers, and I may not, obviously I don't know the answer to this question, but with increases like that, with a fairly small percentage of students, bringing them to the table, conversation, is it appropriate to be considering alternative placement for some of these students, or is that not?
It's always on the table, right? I think you have to keep that option in play. We've talked about some of these kids in potential placement, but we continue to work with what we have, and as a team, we're pretty active on. You don't want to have to do that. We have a lot of really good resources, but we have some kids that just really, really struggle.
So this is all incidents that were witnessed by staff.
Yep, I think.
So if a
yeah.
student comes forward and says, I'm going to pick on Mark because he's sitting next to me, found a student, I say, Mark's bullying me.
Yeah.
And an investigation is done and come to find out there's no evidence supporting that. That wouldn't end up in here, right?
I would record that, but I would record it to make sure I remembered it, but it wouldn't result in a consequence. You wouldn't get, it would be like an unfounded. So at the end of the year, we have to fill out state reports. And how many incidents of bullying did you investigate? How many were found true? Things like that. So
that information wouldn't be in.
as far, we have that information, like.
Right, no, I'm
bullying,
saying,
yeah.
but like those reported incidences are not, because there's no consequences. These are only ones with consequences?
Not necessarily. There may be some of these that didn't result in These are reports that were filed by teachers, that were reported by teachers, correct.
Just to follow up on Mark's question about, I guess my concern is I don't have a feel for the number as far as how it impacts school, the day-to-day, what happens in the classroom. But if the teacher is reporting this and it's happening in a class, I assume everyone else in the class is impacted by this behavior. And that's where my concern comes in, because now you've got potentially one person ruining the class for, 20 others. And it might be a 10 seconds, it could be a 15-minute disruption, but they've now lost instructional time. I guess my concern is, at the beginning, we talk about all the, supports that we have in place, whether it's a school resource officer, psychologists, counselors, all these groups. But it doesn't feel like the numbers are going down, they just keep going up. So it leads me to think we're still not doing something right, or we're not allocating resources in the right areas. I don't know the answer, but it's I'm concerned that we're going to get requests for more staff for these types of things. And in the past, what I've seen is it hasn't necessarily shown in the data that what we've put into it has shown benefits.
Understood. I wish I had a great answer for that. That's a good question. Right?
Any other questions for the middle school? All right, moving on to the high school.
Good evening. I have some of what to echo from all of the other schools. I did break down the data for you in terms of the grades, and what you can see from that is generally as the kids get older, they tend to have fewer referrals, which is great. They're heading towards adulthood and they should be learning to behave more like adults. A couple of things of note: technology still remaining our highest category of a violation, something that we track pretty consistently because it is part of our digital distraction policy. So a significant number of our violations do come from that. And even though it is something that we're concerned about, it is obviously on the less extreme scale. We still do have issues with drugs and tobacco on campus. As you see there, that leads to some of our more significant consequences. Overall, though, one of the more positive numbers from the report is that 81% of our students received 0 or only 1 referral all year long. So that was something positively to note. I'm obviously happy to answer any questions that you have.
What's the difference between tech and minor tech?
So minor tech is something that the teachers are going to report. Technology, just without the M, is something that will be brought to the office. So it's something that we are going to record because they have to hand in their phone, or it's a violation because they took a video or audio recording of someone else, something like that. That's a major violation. We consider it an administrator managed versus a staff managed.
Any other questions for the high school? Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, so we're moving on to the Huot end of year report.
Dave Warner, the director, provides that report to us every year. As you can see, reading the report, great things are happening in the Huot Center as well as Police School and Ag. If you have any specific questions that I can't answer, I'll reach out to Dave.
I do have one question actually. Is, because I heard about this firsthand, but I know there are some programs where, like plumbing being for example, where there might be 2 classes, and then the second year of the 2 years, there may only be 1 class. So basically they choose, 3 students from each school district to move on to the second year of the class. I do think, and I saw this in the report, they did make a modification to allow a second group, but that didn't happen until pretty late. And I was concerned that I guess my question is, how do they determine when they're gonna run a second year and how many? Because I don't think it's just numbers based. And I don't know if it has to do with hiring another teacher, or whether there's that capacity, but that was one thing that popped up during the year was, who are the few kids from every school that are gonna get to move on? Because there could have been 8 kids from Belmont High School, and 5 of them didn't have a chance. Now, I think that got rectified to some degree, but I was concerned about how they dictate how many sessions of a second year class they have. I feel like if somebody takes the first year and wants to continue, we should be doing everything in our power to allow that to happen. I don't want kids to get locked off.
So every year, the Regional Advisory Board is brought up to speed on what potential enrollment numbers are for the next school year. And recommendations come from the director specifically around whether they're going to add another section or they're not going to run a specific program. When they have to add another section, it potentially means adding another staff member, which impacts the Laconia School District budget. So they have to go through their budgeting process to determine as to whether they can hire another staff. And what's even more difficult potentially than running another section is not the monies that are attached to it, but finding somebody to teach that additional section. I know Dave does a great job every year of making sure that the Regional Advisory Board is aware of some of their challenges, as well as make suggestions in moving forward for the following year for the Regional Advisory Board approval. But he is, and they are restricted to Laconia School District budget. By all means, as to staffing, because they're Laconia School District employees that are part of their overall operating budget. I know they do the best that they possibly can to run the programs that students are interested in, and making sure there's a seat at the table for all of those students.
So given that situation, let's, just scenario, the numbers warrant an additional staff member within that program. Budget isn't going to allow it. Is there any possibility where some of the other sending districts can assist Laconia School District, financially to make sure that staffing can happen and that program can run? Or is that not something that's been discussed?
That's never come up where it's a shared cost of a staff member. I mean, it's part of the tuition that we pay into Huot. It's all tied into their operating budget for the reimbursement. As for each district in the regional agreement providing additional monies for an additional staff, that's never been discussed, because the challenge is that the budgets have already been set before in all of the sending districts, before they might know as to whether they need another section or not. So the timing is always challenging.
Right.
But to answer your question, it's never been brought up where there's a shared contribution to provide a salary for an additional staff member. They have to figure it out in their operating budget, and then we see it as a reimbursement when we get billed.
Because we always have money left over at the end of the year, as does undoubtedly, every district. And if Huot found itself in a situation where, their budgets aren't gonna fly, I don't know if, collectively, if some of these other sending districts, can support that.
And any end of year funds that districts might have, those can't be designated to pay the salary of a staff member for the following school year, correct?
Correct.
So it's not, you can't have districts go back and look at their end of year fund balance and say, well, we can contribute $20,000 to an $80,000 additional position out of this year's funds to get designated for the following school year for salaries.
Plus Laconia is under a tax cap requirement, so they have to be careful with what they can do for adjusting their budget anyway.
Okay. Just think it out loud.
Yeah.
All right, we have one final report in there, curriculum, instruction, and assessment. Mr. St. James is here to answer our questions.
Yeah, so just a couple of things to point out. a lot of the work this year with teachers was focused on competency-based education and responding to the needs and concerns of the community. So I am proud of the discussions that have been had, and I think we're getting closer to realizing the common vision of how we can set clear learning goals and communicate well how students are doing in their progress toward and beyond them. I do talk about professional development and the concern that there's just not enough time. We've got a lot on our plates, and that's how it always is, but there's also some pretty heavy lifting to anticipate in the coming year. So within, I just did a quick bulleted list of some of the major things that we know we will need some PD and teacher collaborative time around. We are switching from Empower to Alma, and that will take some time to learn and get used to. We're continuing our revision of proficiency scales to make sure that they are aligned and clear and consistent. The elementary schools have selected Wit and Wisdom as a potential literacy resource. So they'll be doing a pilot this year, and I just want to let you know that so that you can anticipate, if all goes well in the pilot, that we will probably be back early in 2025, so February, March, looking to hopefully adopt something that's going to work well for teachers. So you can see there's a lot, and just want to make sure that we're mindful of the fallout when there's a lot of demand on teachers and not a lot of time, and that's anything from teachers being out of the classroom more often because we're getting subs to cover so they can have time to work on what they need to do, to the things not getting done or not getting done well or consistently. And even in some cases, I am concerned that we're burning teachers out when they're asked to teach all day in addition to learning new things and implementing new initiatives. The state assessment results are just in a spreadsheet form, and the trend for the most part, a lot of things stay fairly consistent in that our average scale score for each particular assessment in each grade level is typically climbing, although not a whole lot, and it's typically around the same as the New Hampshire average, and both the Shaker average and the New Hampshire average are close but a little below the cutoff score for proficiency. We do see that results in Canterbury grades 3 through 5 tend to be a little bit higher than those in BES for the same assessments, and that most cohorts, as you kind of follow them in that first tab, are increasing the percentage of students who are proficient, with some notable exceptions, particularly in math this year. We saw some dips in a lot of math assessments for many of the grade levels this year. But yeah, I know there's a lot of data in there, and that's something we're looking forward to digging into with teachers in the coming school year. But I am happy to answer any questions that you have at this time.
In looking at the 3 through 8 spreadsheet with ELA, math, and science, out of approximately 80 data points, it looks like there might only be 10 where the percentage is at 50% or slightly above, with a max at 71%. efficient, but I mean, most of them are below 50% proficient. Am I the only one concerned about this?
No, no, you're not the only one concerned about that.
So what's the game plan?
So as I mentioned, we are looking at new resources for elementary literacy instruction. That has been certainly a need that we've seen, and this year's ELA scores are better to look at than the math ones, but we know that teachers need more consistent resources that they can go to so that we're not leaving kids with gaps. What you don't see that we're able to see on a more detailed level is we can drill down to the level of a particular standard in each of these content areas, and that gives us a longer view of looking at this. It's cohort by cohort. You know, we've got a class of anywhere from 11 or 12 in Canterbury to over 100 in the middle school, but as those groups change, it's volatile. But over looking at one grade level over the past 4 years, we can see where there are trends in standards where we know our students are below proficient and where we see that there are relative weaknesses for our students compared with their performance on the rest of the tests. So that's the kind of data that we can dig into with teachers, and we can see some trends, like the classic example is geometry. In most grade levels, geometry tends to be on the state assessment, something that our students don't perform as well in. It also tends to be the topic in math that is covered at the end of the year. So knowing that, okay, they didn't have it when they took the test, but then they got more instruction in geometry, that's one way to look at it. Or we could say, well, we need to change the way we teach geometry, and maybe it shouldn't be left till the end of the year. So those are the kinds of things that we can do to really dig in and look at what does this represent? Beyond just the scores and the averages, what does this show us about our instruction that we can improve?
Right, but so I'm going to ask what the actionable items are. So I'm looking at math, percentage of students proficient or above, grade 8 in 2023 at 18%. I've been in a classroom before. I've had students that just don't care. Have I ever had a class where, let's see, 82% of the students, just don't care? No. So when I see only 18% of the students are proficient, I'm asking the question, well, what's actionable? We can identify all we want. We can dig into the data, all we want. But what's going to happen? Because if we track that back, it goes 18, 32, 16, all the way back to 2021, and I think it's a safe bet that number was basically the same going all the way back, pre-COVID. I have a daughter in the 2024, which is at 36%, and I know for a fact when my wife and I were identifying math concerns at the elementary school, we were ignored. So when I say what's actionable, digging into the data is all well and good, but what's going to happen? Because I feel, and I'm not trying to offend, but from experience at the elementary school and at the middle school, it seems it's lip service.
I disagree. I don't think it's lip service at all to say that we can't make sweeping decisions based on a percentage of students who are proficient. So I'm sincere when I say we need to be looking at where are the particular gaps. And this is not the only data point that teachers use. So absolutely there are concerns in here. there are concerns showing up in other data points as well. And there are other data points that say, oh, okay, we're doing all right here. So, in the most general way, we need to look at the data to identify where are the gaps in instruction. It's not about a particular student's performance on one given day on one given assessment. It's about over time, we can see that there are areas that we're not reaching kids to proficient. That's where we can focus in and we can say what are the resources we have for instruction, what are the assessments that teachers are using in the classroom that can prepare students and can show teachers what do students know and what do they need to know. And we can look at instructional practices and methods and say the way that we're teaching these specific skills can shift. Again, all of that takes time. It takes time with teachers. It takes a whole team to be working on something like that. So it's not just on the shoulders of one specific educator. But that's where we can, and what we're working with PLCs at every school is building the capacity to do that. The data literacy to be able to say, this is what I'm seeing and this is what it means and here are the implications for my practice. And then it takes the support of administration and the curriculum team to get the right resources and the research into their hands. Things like coaching is what really moves the needle so that teachers are given the opportunity to practice something, to get feedback on it, to work with somebody, to really learn about what's the evidence that shows why this particular practice will help students learn. So that's the action plan. I can't give a whole full, it comes down to grade by grade, subject by subject, skill by skill, that we have to dig in and address those.
So you don't think that by spending all the exorbitant amounts of time collecting the data, evaluating the data, digging into the data, that's how we wind up with an 8th grade class at 18% proficient?
No, I don't.
Okay, I disagree.
Just from I'm not a teacher, I'm not in the classrooms, I don't know how it works. My role as a board member is to, I think, get data and look at it, try to understand it, and look for ways to improve it. I feel like we do this every year, and it just kind of keeps going and going. I guess the action plan that you stated, though, when would we reap the benefits? When would we see it in the data, or maybe we're never going to see it in the data? I guess that's my question is, from our point of view, when we get these reports, once or twice a year, when are we going to see improvements?
Yeah, it's a good question, and again, I'm giving you the state assessment summatives. Like that's the only piece that you're getting. We have other things that we're looking at, and that's where we can see some improvements in more specific areas within literacy, within math. So it's hard because it's all very complex when we're talking about different cohorts of students in different years on different assessments. But the goal of increasing data literacy in our staff is so that we can be able to study all the input that we have and say, this is a need, this is an action that we can implement, and then we can see how did it work. So on a smaller scale, we are seeing those specific initiatives that we're working on to target a specific skill for a grade level or a class. We're seeing those improvements on different assessment measures. Obviously, we want this big picture to also show some improvement, and that's where, you know, certain things like, okay, we're changing our approach to math instruction, and it's discouraging to see after 2 years looking better after that change. It's discouraging to see the dip now. You know, just anecdotal, what we heard from teachers is the feedback that the test seemed harder, the math test in particular at the 3, 4, 5 grade levels. I don't know a way to you know, confirm that or quantify it, but there are bigger things. You know, I don't want to say that it's about when do you put your geometry unit. That's a small shift. There are things like students who read on grade level in grade 2 all of a sudden don't in grade 4. Why? And we have data that shows they had gaps in their phonological and phonemic awareness, and that they had workaround systems that were successful up to 2nd grade, and then they fall apart because they don't have that sound mapping. It's things like that that we can say, we need a shift in our instruction, and in order to do that, here's our game plan. And that's, you know, in the longer term, bigger picture, that's where we're at with literacy, is knowing a lot more than we did 2-3 years ago, and hearing from teachers, please give us more consistent resources so that we're not reinventing the wheel ourselves every time.
You mentioned other data points. So, for example, like STAR or something.
Mm-hmm.
Do you find that there's any correlation between, like, are they doing well, maybe on that report, and then they're not?
Yes, we do see that at times, and really what we have seen with STAR in particular is that it's not a super strong correlation with their STAR performance compared to their state assessment performance. And it goes both ways, but more often they're showing more success in STAR than they are in the state assessment. And that's, you know, depth of knowledge and all kinds of factors go into that, what the test is asking them to do. I think one of the best things that we saw this year was a huge influx of really specific and much more actionable data from the dyslexia screening process. So with that new state law, it demanded a lot from us, and we kind of scrambled last summer to get things in place, but the outcome was we have a much better picture of our K through 3 learners as readers and where their needs are so that we can address those.
For next year, can you add in for the grades the amount of students that opted out or opted out?
Yes.
I hear from a lot of students, they have a lot of anxiety about state testing.
Yeah.
I would imagine they do better on STAR. It's probably shorter periods,
yep.
Not as much leading up to it. So I know that we are looking at the state testing results, but I would be hard pressed to find a kid that gets excited to do state testing.
Yeah.
They're long periods.
Yeah, and I can get that data for your participation rates and opt-out rates for each grade level.
Sorry, Mr. Pope.
Sorry, Silas. I would actually I'll talk about participation for a minute. We had approximately 18 opt-outs this year. You know, specifically, I would say it's heavier in the 8th grade or our opt-outs. So you see it hit on that. And unfortunately, when a student opts out, it impacts our test negatively because it counts as a 0 when everything gets averaged in, which you may not know that. I'd also like to add, there's a lot to celebrate in some of that data. You know, if you look across that, you really break that down. there's some really nice increases there for students that worked really hard. So just, I think looking at that a little closer, I think there's some really positive things to look at that, specifically, a lot of ELA scores and our science scores across the district. I think there's some really positive things to kind of highlight as well.
Thank you for that. I didn't mean to be all doom and gloom. I spoke before.
I get it.
So I appreciate you.
This is
pointing
a
that out.
challenging test.
Yeah.
It's really hard, and it's understandable why some families choose to opt out, but, opting out is a nice option for families, right? They can opt out because of state law, but the federal law doesn't recognize when that's all calculated, right? So a student or family that opts out counts as a zero in terms of our calculation when we're held accountable for it.
I think it's important to know on that note is that concern has been brought to the DOE, specifically to the commissioner. In monthly meetings that we have with the commissioner of superintendents, is this opt-out has a significant impact on our overall district results. And just as Mr. Pope had said, so the federal government, their laws do not allow for families to opt out of state assessments. However, our state law does. So the DOE over the past several years always proposes a change in the legislature to change a bill that does not allow families to opt out because of the negative impact it has on families, but it never flies. So 18 sounds like a small number, but a zero, as you know, on any assessment, and is going to have a significant impact on your district-wide results.
And that's 18 just for the middle school.
Yeah, so so that's also, because remember, you got to meet a certain threshold for participation as well as a certain threshold for proficient. So counting as a zero, that knocks you against your proficiency level, but then your participation rate has to be a certain level as well.
I'd also be curious, just with maybe in the elementary school, those significant absences, how many of those kids were our ones and twos? I mean, if they're not there to learn, they're not going to perform well.
I think another thing to keep in mind too is, students that are below grade level, they're required to take the grade level test assessment. So a student that might have an IEP that shows they're on a, let's say they're in 5th grade, they're on a 2nd or 3rd grade reading level, they're required to take the 5th grade assessment, right? There's no accommodation for there are accommodations within the test, but they're required to take that grade level test.
I just have one thing. I was thinking, I'm circling back to the new literacy curriculum for the elementary schools. He said bring it to us in early March. Are you looking for money in early March for this program?
No,
okay.
It's already in.
I was thinking about that because you said that, and I'm like, wait a second. If we need money, we need to know about it now.
Yeah, so it's in the general fund for this year, anticipating we would get something. And right now we're just piloting to make sure that this is going to be what will work for us.
All right.
We do also have, we're working with the DOE on a grant specifically for these pilot materials on the PD. So that's nice that somebody else pick up that tab for now.
Jeff, on that note, when he's referring to the February, March, that's coming to the board for approval for the program, because the board has to approve. However, prior to that, through our budget development process, if there's additional resources that we know that we can identify that we need, it'll be part of the budget development process, included in the proposed
I didn't want to be
budget.
surprised.
No.
You said March. Okay.
So I have some questions about other items in the report. So the first one is on professional development and the ask for more time. So how do we get there to give teachers more time? I want to put my parent hat on and probably throw out a very unpopular opinion. So the week before vacations, my child doesn't want to go to school. He tells me that they're not learning, that they're doing fun stuff. He's kind of an introvert. Do we have opportunity to use volunteers to help staff some of those activities to allow teachers to get more time?
I don't know, but that's a creative idea. I think the tension tends to be between where are the students? You know, if they're not here in school or the teachers aren't responsible for supervising them, then is it back on the parents? Or can we get creative, you know, a suggestion like that? I have worked in a district that had early release days that were paired with a really strong after-school program that could then be staffed by student volunteers from the upper grades to work with some of those younger students, and that was great. And the kids got community service time, and the younger kids were happy, and the parents weren't, you know, all of a sudden responsible for their kids at 1 instead of 3:30 in the afternoon. But that's, you know, that's it, is thinking about how can we free up teachers during their contracted time while not putting students back on parents, or, you know, how can we do something worthwhile with students while the teachers are doing the non-instruction part of their responsibilities.
So getting creative like that is, you know, those are good ideas. As for volunteers in general, they're not a volunteer isn't someone that can be left alone with a class. You know, there's direct supervision responsibility that a employee of the district has. Volunteers work with our employees, so to have a volunteer that's alone with a class is not something particularly liability-wise that we would do. What has come up, and for those board members that aren't familiar with the history, is that we did have 8 professional development days, and we're down to 6 through the negotiation process, so we lost 2 PD days. And the reason for that is because there were concerns that we were getting out later than other districts because we had longer professional development days. More professional development days than other districts within the region, so it went from 8 to 6. So we lost 2 PD days. There is, you know, suggestions of going to schedule throughout the year early release days and or delayed opening days, like some of the other districts do. In order to do that, the board and the Teachers Association would have to be willing to open up our current contract, particularly for that one article, to, if you're going to make any changes to the school calendar, add in more professional development time. And then again, you have to get, I'm sure you would have community input at our board meetings if we were to go to early releases or delayed openings, because clearly that would impact our families. But that is a way to get additional PD time to our teachers without adding full PD days like the 2 that we had in the past. So there are ways to do it. It's a willingness of not only the board, but the association as well, to open up on that one article in the collective bargaining agreement. So it's something we could discuss in the future. The board's willing to do so. But we need more time for our teachers. We're trying to get as much time as we possibly can during contractual hours, and that requires pulling teachers from classrooms, and that goes into the problem of getting substitutes in order to cover those classes. So it's a challenge of finding more time for professional development, but you can see there's clearly a need for it.
Substitutes was going to be my next suggestion if I was back on. I feel like we have enough problem finding substitutes when people are sick.
Yeah, it's a challenge.
All right, any other questions or discussion?
I have another one. So you had talked about the work that is being done this year, and it says, but there is still some indecision and delayed decisions that leave the same questions open and uncast. What decisions are being delayed in regards to, this is about making grading and reporting practices clear and consistent?
Yeah, so specifically, if we kind of view that policy IKA as the foundation, and then we can build our practices on that, then that's where we're still kind of circling. And We're prepared to move forward, but I think if we have language that defines what across the board proficient means, then we can use that to align expectations so that in one class it's not astronomically higher of an expectation than in another. So in terms of making things consistent and making things clear, it's helpful for teachers doing that work to have a solid foundation to build on. So that's something that has in some ways kind of held back the work a little bit. But I think the willingness of teachers to do whatever we can and whatever it takes to make it work is always there.
So one of the things that we are going to review tonight is the revised policy IKA. And the ask was to bring those things to the building level. Do you think that is going to help, or do you think that?
I think it will. I think if that, I guess what we need in order to have a system that is clear and consistent is a common foundation that we can all come back to. This is what proficient means. This is what proficient with distinction means. And align our proficiency scales for each specific standard with that criteria. If that happens in handbooks rather than in policy, I don't think it changes the outcome. It just gives us, okay, there it is. Now we can move on to build up from there and make sure that what we have for written expectations and what we have for practices across the building and across the district are more consistent and clearer for learners and families.
Interrupt you for a second. Isn't that the work that should have been done on the front end when we were developing, getting those competencies, down, implementing them? It's almost as if we're starting over.
I'll jump in on this.
Okay, maybe I'm confused.
No, so we're not starting over. We're improving our practice. And the delay that you're asking about, Randy, was a delay in the decision around our grading scale and our policy IKA. So just to lay it right out there. So anytime that there is a potential, there's an unknown for a decision that's going to be made that's going to impact teaching practices, you have people that are hesitant to engage in any type of professional development that might hone their skills towards a specific, let's say, a grading scale if there's an unknown. So you can't get some people to fully engage in that professional development if they feel that there's going to be a change. So why do this if there's going to be a change down the road? There's always that hesitancy. So that's specific to your question.
Thank you.
That delay caused people to not potentially fully engage in the professional development that we've been doing all along around proficiency scales. The proposed draft policy that was brought to the board back in April was much more specific when it came to defining the learning on that 4-point scale. So it's more specific than it's ever been in the past. Whether people are agreeable to that or not, we're still having that conversation by all means. You're gonna see grading wording in the handbooks for first reading on July 23rd. If there's delay in getting that through, then we're going to run into the same situation where people might be expecting a change, therefore why engage in the full practice. So we try to find a balance with the grading wording that you're going to see in the handbooks based on our last meeting. But to your question, Mark, I do agree that it should have been more specific when that policy was put into place in 2015. It was very general. the wording on a 4-point scale. And we now have made that wording that defines the learning on that scale more specific in order to improve the learning that's going to happen. So we have been doing the work to improve by all means.
And one major instance of that is that almost every standard at the high school does not have a specific definition of a 4. And the way that they were built in 2018 and onward was to have a very general, go above and beyond, deeper concepts, new applications. That general wording is in place for almost every proficiency scale in the high school. So when we hear from students, parents, even teachers, not really sure what a 4 means, then that tells us we need to go and define that better. And in order to do that, having an overall grading scale that's aligned to depth of knowledge, so it's research-based, and we can point to it and say, these are the complex skills that students are applying at this level, and here's how it specifically works in this content area for this course. So that's one way in which the work that was done before has value, and in order to create a system that is more consistent and clearer, there's more work to be done.
Thank you. All right, any other discussion on that? All right, moving on. Continuing business, we have on the horizon.
I would at some point like to have a conversation about doing another study on support staff. I can't remember if support staff pay. I don't remember how good of data we've been able to get in the past. But I think we should be having a conversation about revisiting that and seeing where we do rank in the area and sizable school districts.
I know you brought up in the past about looking at taking the curriculum or the class offerings, especially at the high school, and looking at what the actual enrollments are. I know you've asked for that information in the past as well. I think we should reemphasize that and look at some of that information as well.
The only thing I have on Mason is buildings and grounds. We agreed it would start at 5:30. Sorry. I meant to say something last time, but it says 5.
Moving forward with the policy committee, new position that I have, I cannot get leave until the earliest is 5, and I'm basically an hour away. So I can make board meetings, but I don't know what can be done, should be done on the policy.
I think we could discuss that at the policy committee.
Okay. Yeah.
Anything else for that? All right, moving on to the volunteer list. The lengthy one.
That's what I came up with an idea.
That's
This giant volunteer list.
Yes. It really is amazing the number of volunteers we have in the district. It's great.
I'll make a motion to accept them as presented, assuming there are no individual concerns.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor of the motion as presented?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right, we have current policy, IKA grading system, and this is our first reading.
So, like we had discussed at length, this is the New Hampshire School Boards Association, IKA, bringing the grading decisions down to the building level. So this is very short, sweet.
So in reading this where it says the grading system will be approved by the board, does that include changes to it once it's been adopted?
Yeah, so every year the handbooks come to you, so if there's a change from year to year, you have to approve that as a board in your handbooks.
Is this language coming from anywhere? Did we make this up ourselves?
From the New Hampshire School Boards Association.
Yes, but the School Boards Association sample policy. And first reading tonight's for information. Next meeting will be for second reading. That'll be an action item, and the motion would be to remove our current policy IKA and replace it with this policy.
Which also means we have to have a decision on the handbooks in a relatively short amount of time where we technically don't have a grading.
We're doing first readings next week.
What's that? Yeah. But I'm saying if there's any issues and it has to go back, it comes back. Hopefully that's not the case, but the longer we wait until that second reading gets through, there's a gap.
Do we need an extra meeting to make sure that doesn't happen?
I think we won't know until
Yeah, we won't know until we see them.
Yeah. I mean, I'm fine with going with our set schedule, but we also need to know that come that second reading, we have to prepare to have a decision.
Yeah.
Which means we'll probably have a lot of discussion at the first reading.
I think any additional meetings would be discussed at our next meeting.
And the agenda for the 23rd is going to be specific to those handbooks.
Okay.
I'm not going to load up that agenda with other items. It's going to be handbooks. That's
Thank
it.
you.
Thank you.
In addition to the handbooks, is it possible to bring a copy of like the honor report cards with like what the report will look like for each school?
I think what would be helpful, we don't have we haven't built the report cards in Alma yet. However, I think we could probably do some sort of display. I'm going to look at Mr. Pope and Amanda that have worked on this, like a display of what a parent.
Yeah, that's what I'm curious about.
We actually have meetings with Alma in September to start building the report cards and things like that after we get started.
But I think it would be important for the board to see what it looks like in
Right,
Alma.
just to see the difference, to see if it's more
It'll
user-friendly.
make more sense when you see the grading wording that's in the handbooks, because it would jive with what we're going to see.
And what it's going to look like from term to term. So term 1, term 2, and what it looks like at the end of the year.
We won't have that one.
Well, but examples, when you said,
Still mock it up.
Right, you can still say, hey, this is what's available. No,
You won't have that by next meeting. That's the thing.
I don't know.
You have to go into
Do they
Alma
have
and
examples?
configure it and
Okay.
so forth. Alma doesn't have a set of examples because every district designs their report cards and their reporting specifically is very different, as you well know. So we don't have that built out at this point, but we could show you what the parent view would be, so that you see this is how it's reported in Alma, and it aligns with the grading scales that you would see in the handbooks.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful. I know a lot of people have struggled with their power to access and navigate through, so I think it would be helpful to see what it looks like from Alma.
So that one is informational. The next one is the EBCC, which is in the event of bomb, active shooter, and other such events. This one is the second reading.
This is in the action.
Yep.
Motion to approve updates to policy EBCC in the event of bomb, active shooter, and other such events as presented.
Second.
Discussion? All those in favor of the motion as presented?
Aye.
Opposed?
And JLCF, the wellness policy, is also in its second reading.
Motion to approve changes to policy JLCF, wellness policy as presented.
Discussion? All those in favor of the motion as presented?
Aye.
Opposed? Alright. Moving on to nominations and resignations. We can acknowledge the resignations and then list of Appendix B nominations. We can approve in public unless anyone has questions, and we have a personnel nature that we approve non-public.
I do.
Okay. Moving on that. We have public communication and correspondence. One more time, if there's anyone from the public that would like to speak, now is your opportunity to do so.
Hi, Lisa Ober, Belmont. I just wanted to say great job to Silas because I'm a teacher and you guys were, the grade, the 18%, blah, blah, blah. And I know you know where you're coming from, but these teachers work their tails off to get these kids where to go and or where they're supposed to go. And I'm glad Mr. Pope mentioned IEP children have to take it, parents opt out. So you see the whole picture because it's, unfortunately, we deal with the parents as well as the children. And if the parents aren't on board to get these kids educated, we're having a hard time. So you need to look at the whole picture. So I wanted to say you did a really good job, answering your questions, and bravo to the teachers to get them this far because they're doing a good job. So that's all.
I'll chime in just a little bit on that as well, Amanda LeBlanc. The state test is unlike any other learning day in the school year. Like all the posters have to be covered. So all the resources that kids get to look around, and we have to cover everything up. We're not really allowed to, I guess we can speak to the kids, but we're very, very limited on the state test of what we're allowed to do. So on the STAR assessment or any other assessment, if a kid says, I'm having a hard time with this, well, I can, in a roundabout way, say, well, remember the other day when we were talking about such and such? And I can prompt them to kind of get them to get there with help. It's like we're just robots in the room. And when they say, can you come help me with this? I cannot say anything to you. If it's the math test, maybe I can read a word. But beyond that, it's like all of this stuff that we do with you all year long, socially and emotionally, the relationship that I develop with you as a student. On these testing days, it's just out the door.
Any other public comment? Hearing none, we'll close that and move into non-public. Oh, sorry.
One quick question. I don't know what our practice has been regarding applications and hiring during the summer. I thought in the past we've allowed Michael to move forward with hiring, and so I'll make sure if that's the case, if that's still in place, because I know we have some positions that we want to fill and not necessarily have to wait till the next board meeting. So I just want to make sure we're on board with that the plan.
Yeah, the board hasn't authorized me to hire over the summer. That was in the past. That's where we were only doing potentially one meeting per summer. One in July and maybe one in August.
So are you fine with that? I just want to make sure, I know a science teacher at the high school, it's an important position as I understand it. So we don't want to leave somebody hanging, waiting on a board decision if we don't have to. But if we're fine, 2 weeks meeting, then that's fine.
I mean, if the board wants to authorize me to do that, there's not an action on my agenda, but if you're comfortable with that, as a board, give me the authority to hire over the summer. between board meetings. That'd be great.
I would prefer that just because it also holds up another district potentially, because I wouldn't resign until I had board approval. So if somebody's waiting for board approval, then they're not going to resign from wherever they're at for 2 weeks or something, so.
Well, if they've got multiple offers and they're waiting on a decision.
So board entertain, that'd be
Do we
great.
need a motion on that or no?
Sure, that'd be
Yeah.
great.
I'll make a motion to give Mr. Piercy authority in hiring over the summer as fit to fill needed positions.
Discussion? All those in favor of the motion as presented?
Aye.
Opposed?
Thank you.